Hello everyone, good morning. Am I audible to everyone? Yes, happy Teachers to all. Yep. Am I audible? Am I audible to everyone? Am I visible properly? Yes, am I audible? Yeah, that's great. That's great. That's great. Fine. I hope everyone did the assignments. Okay, great. Great, great. So let's start with today's session. So today we are going to deal with something called as objects and functions, one of the most prominent, most important topics in JavaScript or in any other language you can say. So we are going to start with objects and functions, and we'll also see a few examples on that. And remember, objects and functions are one of the most important things in JavaScript because everything that we are going to do from now will always have these two things. Everything we are going to do from now will always have these two things. Like it will have everything that we have learned, but objects and functions like are very regularly used. Like even if you want to print something or if you want to store some kind of data, you still need objects and functions. So let's start it today. Okay, fine. Okay, fine. Let's start. I hope everyone can see my screen properly. Can everyone see my screen properly? Please give me some yeses. Okay, great. So today I'll create a file first named as objects.js. So in this file, we are going to work with objects and see how it works and everything. I'll increase the font size, don't worry. Let me just get to the screen. Okay, fine. Is it visible now? Is it visible? Is my font size visible now? Everyone? Okay, great. So today we are going to deal with objects. Now, if you have learned any kind of programming language before this, you might be knowing what is an object. So if it is not, screen is not clear. Are you sure? Screen is not clear. Well, I'm checking out YouTube. Okay, fine. Is the screen clear to everyone? All clear? That's great. Fine. So when I say objects in any language or in JavaScript, an object is basically a collection of, like, just hear this out because it will be very helpful to understand. When I say an object is basically a collection of properties and functionalities. Anything in this world is an object. Everything that exists in the world can be said as an object. An object is nothing but, you can say, a collection of few properties and methods. Or you can say the work that it does. So something like this. Object is basically a collection of properties and method, and the method basically is the work that it does. And you can say a property is something like features that it has. For example, if I have to consider a human as an object, if I consider a human as an object, you can say my eyes, my hands, my mouth, my tongue, everything is basically an property. If I'm an object, everything that I have is a property. My hands, my nails, my hairs, my everything, my eyes, my mouth, and everything. And the functionalities I do with the help of that properties is basically the methods that I have. For example, I eat, I shake hands, I see, I can talk, I can walk. Everything that I do with the properties that I have is basically my methods, the functionalities I perform. So in a nutshell, object is basically a collection of properties. That means a particular thing that has some features, and the methods that basically means the functionalities that are performed by that properties. And that's all. That's all you have to understand by an object. That's so easy. Is that clear what is an object in real world? And anything in this world can be an object. If I say, I will go with the syntax, don't worry, Achal, we'll go with the syntax. We just don't have to talk it about now. So if I say a phone is an object, so the screen, the buttons, these are the properties, and the functionalities I do with them, when I click, something has happened. When I open an app, something happens. All those are basically functionalities, the work that it does. So if we like, we can also create objects in programming. So that basically it helps us to understand things in a more like clear way, because in real world we deal in objects. Everywhere we deal in objects. Everything has a property and functionality. So in programming also we can create things that we want as an object so that they are easily usable, so that we can understand easily. So in programming, when I talk about objects, these properties are nothing but, you can say, variables. These properties are nothing but variables. The variables that we have will basically, yes, deal with the variable, exactly. So the properties that we have will basically become variables, and the methods that we say that is working are basically our functions. That's all. That's the replacement in programming. So properties, the variables will become properties, and the functions will become the method, the function. And we are going to understand everything today about this. Is that clear, everyone? Is that clear, everyone? Okay, fine. So the first thing that we're going to learn today is not objects first. We're going to understand functions first. Because we have already seen variables, right? So we know what properties can be. So the second thing that we'll learn, what are functions, so that we can also see how things work, how things are called, and then we can move to the actual object that contains both of these. Is that clear, everyone? So I'll just rename it to functions.js. Now, when I say a function, please, let's focus. So now when I say a function, my voice is clearly, is it not audible, everyone? Is it fine now? I'm speaking a little louder now. Is it audible now? Okay, great. So when I say a function in JavaScript, basically a function, you can say, is nothing but a block of code. That's all. A function is nothing but a block of code, something like a task. That means, let's say you have 3 or 4 lines of code and you're performing something with that 3 lines of code, and that's all. That's basically a task. Is my voice clear now? Everyone is complaining about voice. Is it clear? I think some people might face some issue because of the network, I feel. Font size, but yeah, can't you see it? Because if I zoom it a little more, then it will become messy for you to understand. Okay, great. Okay, fine. So basically, let's assume a task here. So let's say I have few variables. Let's say I have a variable called as variable A, or let's say variable num1, that basically is 20. And I have a variable num2 that basically is 40. And I'm performing a task of addition. Just take the simple example to understand functions very well. So I'm performing a task. So I'll say var result. Oh, and we are not going to use var, we said. We're going to use let. Oh, you can also use var, that's not a problem. But that's deprecated. So let's stick to the new one. Fine. So let task is to add those numbers. So num1 plus num2, and at the end we are going to print. So console.log result. And that's all. So this is the task that we have. So basically, we are performing a task that basically is adding 2 numbers and printing it on the console. And let's see what is the result of this file. So we also need an HTML file where we can include this JS. So let's get an HTML file that we didn't create. And I hope everyone now knows how to link HTML and JS. So I'll just make an index.html. That will be our HTML for these 2 sessions, for today and tomorrow. So HTML5. So let's link the document. Script. And then we'll go src, and then a console.log is to print something on console. Gandhar, it's just to print something on console. You'll see it in a moment. Or you can watch the previous videos to understand it. So let's connect it with functions.json. That's perfect. So now we have an HTML document that is basically connected to our function.json. Now let's run it. So you can run it with the live server, or you can just copy the path and run it. So that's not a problem. I'll just copy the path for now. Let's copy path. Let's get on the browser. So I need a new window for now. So I'll just take it from here. It's fine. Just paste the path, run it. Now if we go in console, you see 60. So that's it. We have performed addition of two numbers, and very easy. So we have 20, 40, that is basically addition will be 60. So let's assume this is a task that we are performing. So this is a task that we are performing. And now let's say I want to perform this task multiple times. I want to perform this task, let's say 2 times. So what I have to do now is I have to go like this and then print it again. Now I'm performing this task 3 times. So like understand it like a real world code. So let's say if I have like 20 lines of task, if I have a code that is basically 20 lines of task, and I want to use it like, let's say 10 times. So I have to write it 10 times. So now that is a problem. So if I want to write same kind of code and I have to use it 10 times, basically what I'm doing is I'm repeating my code. And that will basically create a load on my browser when it tries to interpret and run it. So now, here comes the role of a function. So as I said, a function is a block of code. So what you can do is, let's say if you feel that you're performing a task, so what you can do is you can name that task. So let's say what I can do is I can make a block for this task. And basically when I said a block of code is known as a function. So what I can do is I can name this particular, like a set of code. So I'll name it anything. I'll name it add. Now to name a function, you just can't write anything. So what you have to do, you have to specify that this is a block of code, and it is done with the help of a function keyword. So we can write function, and you can name it anything. So a function always has a name until it is not in like a, you can say a closure function or an anonymous function. So this is a function that is having a name add. So whenever you create a function, you always apply parenthesis, that is basically rounded brackets after the name of the function. And then you need curly braces to enclose the block. Just like if, just like for loop, just like anything you have. So now I have a function, and the name of the function is add, and this is the code that it holds. So what happens now? So basically when you create a function is never called by default. A function is never called by default. Remember this, a function is never called by default. For example, if I have created a function, so now what I have done is I have blocked my code. So I have created a block for my code. So now if I run it, if you see, if I just go and refresh, nothing prints, because functions don't do anything by default. They're just created. They are just created. So we have to call a function, and to call a function is basically you have to call the name of the function. So the name of the function is add, and then again the parenthesis and give it a semicolon. Now as you can see, it's doing the same thing. You just go and refresh it. Okay, perfect. It's doing the same thing. Now let's assume the same case again. I want to reuse this function. I want to use it again somewhere. So I don't have to write it again just like the previous example. What I can do is I can just call it again, and that's all. You can see it like this. I can just call it thrice or 4 times or 100 times. It doesn't matter. So now what we have done is we have removed the repetitive code. So what I can do now is I can use this add 100 times by just writing it 1 time. That's what a function does. Is that clear? It's very basic. We are going to like explore it more right now, but is it understood now? Is it understood what is a function? A function is basically a block of code which has some name that can be called multiple times, and it basically removes the repetition of code. Is that clear? Is the concept of functions clear? Okay, amazing. Okay, amazing. Now, if I see this function, so that's perfectly fine. I am repeating this add again and again. Now, the problem is, the actual problem here is, inside my function, I have two values, that is 20 and 40. So anytime I call it, it's always 20 plus 40. It is never going to change. It will be always 20 plus 40. But for example, let's say I want to perform something like, like this is add function, and I want to add numbers, but the numbers should be of my choice. It should not always be like 20 and 40, because if I call it 100 times, I'll get 60 100 times, because it will always, will have a doubt session, Pratiksha, don't worry. So I'll always add 20 and 40 here. So let's say I want to use this function, but I want the values of my choice. But I can't do it inside my function. I have to pass. So now if I want values of my choice, so I can do that while calling. I can say function, I can like give dynamic values to the function. I can say the function like take these two values and add it. Don't always add 20 and 40. Take these two values and add it. So if you want to do it, if you want to pass data dynamically to a function while calling it, remember this line, if you want to call a function, if you want to give values to a function dynamically while calling it, you have to use something called as parameters. You have to use something called as parameters. So what you can do is now, so you can just go inside the brackets of the function declaration. So remember this thing, this is a function declaration. I'll just name it here. This is a function. There are more ways to create a function. So this is basically function declaration. Remember this thing. So what I can do is now we can just go on up here and create two variables inside this parenthesis. So I can say num1, comma, num2. And now what I can do is I can remove this num1 and num2 from here. Like this, just like this. Now my add function has two parameters, num1 and num2. Now that basically means whenever I call this function, I have to pass the values for that parameters. Remember this. If my function has any parameters, so you have to always remember that whenever you're calling that function, you have to pass values for that parameters. So now I have two parameters. That basically means while calling it, I have to pass two values. And when you pass values for parameters, that values are basically known as arguments. So what I can do is I can pass 20 or 30 for the first number. And remember the sequence, it's always the same. 30 and let's say 50. And that's all. So what will happen now? 30 will go inside num1, 50 will go inside num2. And inside it, I'm using num1 and num2. And that's all. That's all. If I just save it, run it, refresh the page, can you see it's 80 now, 30 plus 50. Now what I can do is, I can just go on down here. I can say 50 plus 70. Refresh it. You see 80 and 120. So now this is the same function that is giving you two different results depending on the value that you have passed. I'll show you how to take inputs. Don't worry, buddy. Don't worry. I'll show it today only. Don't worry. We are going to deal with objects, so you'll learn how to do it. So is that clear to everyone? This is how you pass parameters. So remember, these are known as parameters, and the values you pass for them are known as arguments. Always remember this. Always remember this. Yes, you can return. Let's see. We'll see. Don't worry about it. Is that clear? We're just going step by step. Step by step. Is that clear, everyone? Is that clear, everyone? Is the concept of functions clear? You don't have to declare. Parameters are never declared anywhere else. Parameters are always declared inside the you can say the parenthesis. They're always declared inside the parenthesis. Yeah, you don't have to mention any kind of let, because whatever you pass, whatever kind of value you pass, it always takes it. Let is not mandatory there when you're creating the parameters. Is that clear, everyone? Yeah, you can use that. Don't worry. Windows.prompt, we can use it, but we are not going to just see it now. When we deal with objects, we'll see all that. Remember, let is just a keyword. Fine. So even if you don't do it, it knows I'm creating a variable. So while specifying parameters, you don't have to use let. It's totally fine. Fine. So this is how you make your functions dynamic by passing values. Is that clear? Okay, fine. Sure. So now there's one more way of creating function here. What you can do is you can also do some, like if I want to perform the same task, I can do something like this. I can do like constant add. I can name it like this, equals to function. Now remember this. This is very important. Let's take this only, paste it here. Let's name it something else. Let's name it addition. That's totally fine. And so now I have two functions which are basically doing the same things. It's also adding two numbers. It is also adding two numbers. The first function name is add, and the second function, let's name it add so that you don't get confusion, any kind of confusion. So I'll just name it add again. Now let's comment this and let's see if this still works. Let's add. Let's save and check. Refresh the page and it still works. So there's one way of creating function. You can name like this function keyword, the name of the function and the parameters. The second way is you can just specify the name like a variable and then you just have a function, an anonymous function, and that is still works. Is that clear? These are the two ways of creating a function. Is that clear, everyone? Is that clear, everyone? Okay, fine. Now, let's try to understand, like, why do we have these two ways? Now, let's try to understand what is the difference between if we create a function like this and if we create a function like this. Like, you can say this is known as a function expression. This is basically function expression. Like this. This is a declaration way of creating function, and this is an expression way of creating a function. So now, what is the difference? Let's note it down. Let's understand. So when you declare a function, remember this. There's a thing called as hoisting in JavaScript. There is a term known as hoisting in JavaScript. What hoisting means is whenever you create something, and you can create it anywhere in your code, like on the 100th line, but it is always created on the top. Remember this, JavaScript always pulls it to the top. You can't see it code wise, but internally it is pulled on the top. For example, I'll show you. Now, let's comment it down and let's try to call the function before it has been created. So now I'm calling the function and my function is getting created afterwards. So I'm calling my function first and my function is getting created afterward. Let's see what is happening here. Let's see. If I refresh, see, cannot access add before initialization. That basically means I'm unable to access any kind of add function here. It basically means when I'm using function expression, I have to create the function first and then only I can call it. But when I'm using it like in a declaration way, if I just go on and do the declaration, and now let's try to call it before the function. Now let's see the output. Refresh the page and see, you can still see the output. Is that clear, everyone? What is happening internally is JavaScript is taking this function and hoisting it to the top. This is what JavaScript is doing internally. It is taking the function and hoisting it to the top. Is that clear? Is that clear? So function declarations are always hoisted to the top. And it is not the same case with expression functions. So whenever using expression, you have to create the function first and then only you can call it. But when I'm using function declaration, you can create it anywhere and you can call it anywhere. That doesn't matter because declaration functions are always hosted to the top internally. But always try to declare the functions first and then use it. This is a very bad practice. Is that clear? I'll clear your doubt, Ayush. Don't worry. Please don't spam the chat. I can't read the chats properly. please, I'll show you how to do that. So hosting is basically JavaScript takes the function and pulls it to the top internally. You can't see it, but JavaScript takes the function and pulls it to the top. That's what hoisting means. So if you do it something like this is perfectly fine. You create the function first and then you call it. But let's say if in some case you call the function before declaring it, and let's say if you're using function declaration syntax like this, JavaScript takes this and moves it before the call of the function. That is hoisting. Always pulls the function declaration to the top. Is that clear? That is hoisting. That's all. It takes the functions and pulls it to the top so that everything can be called wherever you have called it. But it happens internally. You can't see it in your code. Is that clear? But it's always a good practice to declare your functions first and then call it. Is that clear, everyone? Okay, so these are the two ways of creating functions. Fine. Let's try to understand one more thing before moving on to the object thing. So what you can do is you can also return values from a function. You can also return values. So right now what I'm doing is my function is adding the two numbers, and what I'm doing is I'm printing. So my function is adding two numbers and I'm just like printing it. Now let's say you have some lines of code down here. Let's say you have some kind of calculation going around here. So let's say there's some kind of calculation, right? There's some kind of calculation going around here. What's happening is, let's say you have some lines of code, and in between the lines of code, you need to add two numbers. In between the lines of code, you need to add two numbers. So what will happen is, if I try to use this add function, in between that to like add those numbers, so what this add function will do, it will just add them and print it. But I don't want to print it. What I want to do is basically, I want this add function to add them and return it to me so that I can use them. So what I can do is, instead of printing it, I can just go on and return the result. Now what will happen is, you will see it now. I'm not printing my result. So now if I call it now, you'll see nothing will be printed because I'm not printing it. I'm not printing it at all. So now to print it, so now basically you have to understand this function is returning the result. So it will give me the result wherever I'm calling that function. It will output the result where I'm calling that function. So what I can do is, I can just go on here, I can just create a variable, let's say let res, and do this. So now what will happen, this add function will be called, it will return the result, and whatever it returns will be stored inside this res, and I can print this res. See it now, res, save it, refresh, and that's all, you get 80 again. Return basically returns the value. So now the function is doing nothing. Now the function is basically adding the values and returning it. So now wherever I call that function, I'll just get that value. That's all. Is that clear, everyone? Is it clear? So instead of printing anything, I'm returning the value. So when I return something from a function, it will just give me the value wherever I call it. So I can use it anywhere. Yeah, you don't have to specify any kind of return type. Sorry about that. Is it clear? Shivangi, we're having a doubt. Is it clear now? Got what does the return do? Is that clear, everyone? Okay, that's great. So now we know how to create a function. Now we also know how to pass like parameters, and we also know how to return something. There's one more thing we can do is, we also have something called as default parameters. So it's like what we can do is, while creating the function, while creating the parameters, I can give some default value to it, like let's say 100. So what I've done is I have given a default value to num2 that is 100. So now what will happen? Just see here. I'm passing 30 for num1 and 50 for num2. Now let's see what happens here. If I refresh it, it is giving me 80. It basically means still my 50 is getting passed to num2. But let's say if I don't pass 50, what will happen? Now let's say now I'm only passing the first parameter that will go to num1 and I'm not passing anything for num2. So I'll just save it. And you can see it's 130. What default parameter does is if you pass a value for it, it will take that. But if you don't pass a value for it, it will take the value that is specified by default. Is that clear, everyone? So like you can use it sometimes if necessary. We'll see what are the cases where you can use it. So that's what default parameter does. If you don't pass any value for a particular parameter, it will take the default one. But let's say if you don't have any default value, you can see it's none now because I'm not passing anything for the second parameter. I'm not passing anything for the second parameter. So it's by default going null. And you can't add 30 plus null. It's basically undefined, not null. It's undefined. And you can't add 30 plus undefined. It's passed by value. It's passed by value. Somewhere it's passed by value. We have not yet introduced objects or something. Is that clear, everyone? Just control S. Control S is a shortcut for saving. Control S. So is the concept of functions clear to everyone? You understood how to create functions and use it, right? Yes, yes. Objects are same everywhere, Manisha. Objects are same everywhere. The concept, the definition of object, like there can be a difference in creating it. There can be a difference syntactically, but the concept is same everywhere. It's basically a collection of properties and methods. That's all. So now we know how to create functions, right? So now let's shift to the next topic. That was objects. And now let's link this file to objects.js instead of functions.js. So now it is linked to this file. So I can just close this file. That's totally fine. Now let's try to understand objects. You don't have that concept of pass by reference in JavaScript, buddy. But I'll explain it in the end. I'll explain what is pass by value and pass by reference in the end with an example. Like I'll just show you. Don't worry. Fine. Now, as I said earlier, object is basically a collection of properties and functions. So let's try to understand how to create them in JavaScript. So you can create objects in JavaScript with the help of literals. So remember, in every other object-oriented programming language, what we do is we create a class first, and then we create an object for it. Remember this thing? In every other object-oriented programming language, we create a class, and then we create an object for it. But in JavaScript, you directly create an object and use it. So it's kind of a class, but it is known as an object. It's still not known as class yet. So let's try to understand this. You can create objects in JavaScript with the help of literals. So you can just do it like this. You can say let obj. It's just the name. You can limit anything. And then you have curly braces. Now these are known as literals here. These are known as literals when you're creating an object. Now inside this curly braces, you can specify, just like class, you can specify your properties, values for it, and you can also specify functions. So let's try to understand. Let's see how it works. So let's say the first property that I have is basically name. And then in objects, you always specify a colon for the separator. So it always, this is basically known as a key. This is known as a key, and then colon, then you can pass a value for it. You can say it like top. So now I have an object obj. Let's not call it obj, let's call it Avenger. So if I say I have an object named Avenger, and inside it I have a key name and a value Thor. Is that clear? This is how I create a basic object. This is how I create a basic object. An object named Avenger, and I have a key inside that is name, and the value is thought. You can also have something like this. You can also have one more key. You can have as many keys, anything like as much keys as possible, not a problem. Age, let's say 1500. So this is how you create an object. And now if you want, you just go on and print this object. So console.log Avenger. Save it, run it. Can you see it? You have this, an object which has two properties, age and name. Is that clear? Now, right now I have printed like the complete object. I have printed the complete object. Let's say if I want to access a particular key from the object, what I can do is I can use the dot notation. So Avenger is my object, Avenger dot name. And now I can access. Is that clear? Yeah, I'll explain Proto when we move on to object-oriented programming language. I'll explain what is Proto. Proto is basically the prototype. It basically refers to a class. Like in every other language is a class. Here it is a proto. It's a prototype. It refers to a class. I'll explain it. Don't worry about it. Yes. Noor, it is somewhat similar to this, that actually JSON is derived from JavaScript objects. The full form of JSON is JavaScript object notation. So the JSON that we see, the JSON that is created, it's basically derived from JavaScript objects only. The full form of JSON is JavaScript object notation. It looks like a JavaScript object completely, but it's string. It doesn't work like a JavaScript object unless it is convert. Is that clear to everyone? You can access like this. You can also access the next property, that is console.log, or I can do something like this. I can just go on here. I can use the template that we have learned, backtext. I can just write, this is just a revision. The name is, I hope everyone from the first class remembers it. The age is Avenger.age. Is that clear? You can just go on, refresh, and you can see the name. Oh, I just got the S. The name is. That's it. And just go on. The name is Thor, and the age is 1500. Dot notation basically means dot. That's nothing else. Nothing else, man. Nothing else. You have class in JS. Don't worry. You have class in JS. Is that clear, everyone? Do you understand how to create objects and how to access? Like we are going to like do more in this. Yeah, Jitendra, please refer to like class number 1 for this. You will understand what templating means. Please, everyone joining it for the first time and like, yeah, age 1500. That's Thor's age. It's not an array. Achal, it's not an array. You cannot access it like that. It's not an array. Avenger is an object. Remember, you cannot access like Avenger of 0 and Avenger of 1. It's not an array. Please, it's not an array. It is an object. You have to access is like using dots, just like in every other language. Okay, fine. Now there's one more way of accessing it in the keys. You can also do something like this. Console.log. You just do something like this. Avenger. You specify this notation, but inside this you cannot specify any kind of index. Just go on and specify it like this. The key. Like this. So Avenger, but you want a name key. This is the key, name. You can also get it like this. You can see, still get the name. Difference between array and object. Array is basically a collection of, you can say, data. It's basically a collection of data stored on different indexes. An object is also a collection of data, but it's not only data, it's a collection of properties and methods. It has data stored inside variables. Array, you can say it's a single variable having multiple values. Object has values inside it. named values. It has names. Is it clear, everyone? So there's one more way of accessing it. You can use like this. Now you can ask, like, if I can access it, like if I can access it using dot notation, why do I have to use this arrow notation to access it? Why do I have to use this? So now, if you like, this gives you a feature of accessing your values dynamically. So let's say if you want to access name, but it is coming from somewhere dynamically. Let's say I have a variable known as, let's say I have a variable name. Fine, I have a variable name, right? So now, if I just go on, it's not its name. Let's say you have key, and it equals name, right? It equals name. So now, if I try to access, let's say my key is, I'm getting my key dynamically. I'm getting my key from somewhere. So the value of my key variable is name, and I'm getting this key dynamically. And I want to access anything that is stored inside this key. So right now, I have stored name in my key variable. So I want to access name from Avenger dynamically. So one thing that I can do is I'll just write Avenger.key. Right? So I feel if I write Avenger.key, I'm basically accessing Avenger.name. Now let's try. Let's save it and see. See, it's undefined. Because if you try to access Avenger.key by using dot notation, it tries to find a key named key inside this object. It tries to find a key named key. It's getting confusion for you, I feel. What I can do is I can just write dynamic key. That's all. If I try to access it like this, what we'll do is it will go inside the Avenger object and try to find something known as dynamic key that is not present inside this. You only have name and age. That's the problem. That's the problem with this. But if you're using this notation, the array one, you can just go on and write dynamic key. Now, the value of dynamic key will be used. So basically, I have written dynamic key, but I'll be using this name string. So I can access it like this. Now, if you can just go on and see, store here. So to access values dynamically, we use this arrow notation. We can name our keys dynamically. Is that clear? It's basically another way of accessing. Just like you're accessing Avenger.name, you can also access it like this, Avenger of name. So you can now access any kind of key from here by using dot or by using arrow notation. But remember, in arrow notation, you have to specify it as a string. In arrow notation, you have to specify your key as a string. And because we are specifying it as a string, we can also perform something like this. You can store your string in some variable and you can put that variable and you can still access it. Is that clear, everyone? Okay, fine. I'll repeat once more. Remember this. So this is an object having two properties. One is name and one is age. So basically, I have two keys. One is name and one is age. There are two ways to access it. One is by using dot notation. So I can write object dot whatever key I want to access. The second is I can use arrow notation. I can write my object name and then inside the bracket I can specify my key as a string. So I want to access name and I have specified it as a string. Is that clear? So let's say if I'm getting my, let's say someone says I want to get name or age. I want to specify my key dynamically. I don't want to specify it like this. I don't want to specify it like name. Look, if I specify name, it is fixed now. I can only access Avenger.name. So I don't want this. If let's say I don't want to use name, my key is coming dynamically from somewhere. My key is coming dynamically from somewhere and it is getting stored in dynamic key. So by using this notation, array notation, you can also specify any kind of variable here. And then the value of that variable will be used. So the value of dynamic key right now is name. So I specified dynamic key here. So it's Avenger.name actually. If I just go on and change the value of my dynamic key to age, now I'm accessing Avenger's age. Is that clear? Yeah, it is as a string, right? Is it clear, everyone? Because when you try to, Pragya, listen, when you try to access it like this, console, let's say I just print it. In dot notation, when you try to access it like this, it never try to understand that this is a variable. It basically tries to find a key named dynamic key inside my object. This is a by default feature. This is basically a by default feature. When I specify dot notation, it doesn't understand that this can be a variable. It just tried to find this key inside my Avenger object, which does not exist. Is that clear, everyone? Is it clear, everyone? Yes, the keys are always unique. There's no need right now, but let's say in future I want to specify something dynamically, so we can use that at that time. No, it's not compulsory. I just showed you what is the difference between this and this. Like if you're doing the same thing, there should be some difference, right? Or why will you create two things that does same things? There should be some difference. So in dot notation, you just access the keys inside, like present inside the object. By using this notation, you can also specify the keys dynamically. You can get some variable to work for you. Is that clear? Is that clear, everyone? Okay, that's perfect. Now let's try to like complicate this a little bit. Let's try to complicate our object. Fine. Let's try to complicate our object. Let's remove everything. Let's try to complicate this. So let's say I have also something called as weapons, right? But now Thor has multiple weapons. Let's try to understand. So name is going to show Thor. Exactly, yes. Name is like we are accessing that name key. In array notation, Abdullah in array notation, you specify your keys as a string. Now I'm specifying weapons, but now let's say Thor has multiple weapons. Thor can have multiple weapons. So now instead of writing like a single variable, what I'm gonna do is create an array for it. So you can also create arrays inside an object. So I can do something like this. Let's say has multiple weapons. So let's say Thor has 3 weapons, right? So I've created an array now. So now Avenger name is Thor, Avenger age is 1500, and Avenger weapons has multiple weapons. That's why like it doesn't have a single value. That's why I've created an array to store multiple values. Is that clear? So you can also do this. Well, and if it is a different class, that doesn't matter if it has the same name. It doesn't matter. Because when you create objects, you will specify 2 different names. Is that clear, everyone? You can also specify arrays. Now let's try to access them. Let's try to access. So like think of weapons as a normal array. That's all. So let's say if I want to access the first weapon of Thor, what I can do is I can just access my key first. So I can just go on write Avenger dot weapons. Now weapons basically is an array. So if I just try to print it, you'll see I've printed all my weapons because it's an array. What I can do is if I want to access only the first one, we have learned arrays in the last lecture, right? You just go on and specify the index. 0. And that's all. If I want the second weapon, let's go on, specify 1, save. This is basically the concept of arrays, that's all. That clear, everyone? That's perfect. If I want, I can also specify some kind of like loop here. So I can just go on, you have learned, right? Loops, last time we learned the for each loop. So if I can just go on. Now Avenger is an object, you cannot specify loop on that. So I'll access Avenger weapons. So now weapons is an array, so it supports this for each. Right? We learned it last time, right? I can name it anything. Please, whoever doesn't understand this, please just go and attend the last lecture. You have the video on YouTube, you'll understand what I'm doing here. If you just go on and write console.log weapon. What's basically happening here is I'm trying to iterate my weapons array. So this will loop through from 0 till the end and take one element and store it inside this particular variable, and I can use it inside my loop. And that's all. You see, I've printed everything. Is that clear? Is that clear, everyone? Is it clear how to create arrays inside object? Is it clear? Yes, Gunjan, that's the perfect definition for it. Okay, fine. Now, you can also have object inside an object. You can also have object inside an object. Let's say you have something called as address, right? Let's say you have something called as address. Fine. So what you can do is you can just write address, right? And if I want an object again, I can just go on and again curly braces. So whenever you want to create an object in JavaScript, remember you can just specify curly braces and do it anywhere. So you can also have object inside an object inside an object. Doesn't matter. It can go to any level. So just like this, I'll just make it simple like this. Fine. So you can just go on like it has let's say few properties. So you can have planet, and let's say planet is Asgard, and let's say home, right? I can say apartment, that's all. Let's say if address has two properties, the planet and home, so I can just write Asgard and apartment, that's all. So address is basically an object which has two properties. So I can say Avenger has address and address has two things. So if I want to access it again, I'll just comment it out for now. And if I want to access Thoughts Planet, what is Thoughts Planet? So I know it is inside address. So I can just write console.log. As you can see up here, let's make it up. As you can see everything. So I want to access Planet. So you can see Planet is inside address and address is inside Avenger. So I can just go on and write Avenger dot address. That is basically I'm accessing address, and address itself is an object. So what I can do, address dot something like that. You can just go on dot and do it everything. Save it, run it. Oh, undefined. Okay, I made a spelling mistake here. Address. That's what we find. That clear, everyone? Is that clear, everyone? Do you understand the concept of objects like a little bit now? So you can use E here, you can use anything. It is basically for the current element, that's all. I'm naming it weapon because I just thought it will be a good naming convention. So is it clear? Is the concept of creating an object, creating an array inside object, and creating, you can say, object inside an object clear? The shortcut for commenting is select everything and press Ctrl/. Is that clear, everyone? Okay, that's completely fine. Now let's try to create something called as functions inside objects. So let's try to do it. So let's remove everything from here. Let's just remove everything from here. And now let's create functions. Fine. So let's create functions. So to create a function inside it, you can just give it any name. So I can just say I have a function called as print weapon, right? And it is basically a function. So the key and the value is a function. Now the value is not a string or a number, it's a function. So you can just write function and something like this. So print weapon is basically the key and this function is basically the value. Just like we learned about expression, right? Just like this. Or where is the file? I'll show. Just like this. Here you go. Just like this. Add is the variable, this is a function. Basically, when you call it, you use add. Same like that. Print weapon is the key, and this is the function. Now what I can do is I can just go on and write all that thing. Now, please remember one thing. Now what's happening here is I want to access weapons, but now I'm not accessing my weapons. Yes, comma is always necessary. Now I'm not accessing weapons outside of my object. Please understand this. Please try to learn this. Please try to understand this. I'm not trying to access weapons outside my object. If I want to access weapons outside, I use this Avenger object. But what's happening now? The weapons are also inside Avenger object, and print weapon function is also inside Avenger object. So now I want to access weapons of the same object that I'm in. So in that case, whenever you want to access something that is in your context, that is in your object only, you can use something called as the this keyword. So I can just write this. This basically means if I try to print it, let's try to understand what this is. Console.log. I just print this, right? And let's try to call the function. So Avenger object dot my function is print weapon, right? This is what I've done. I have a print weapon function inside it, and I've just called it right now. And I'm printing this. Now we have to understand what is the value of this here. Can you see when I print this, I print everything that I have, right? The function, the properties and everything. So basically this means the current object. Try to understand this. This means the current object, right? So I can just go on use this. This means the current object that basically refers to Avenger. And I can just go on this dot weapons. Is that clear, everyone? I can print all the weapons. So whenever you want to access something that is inside of the object, from inside the object, you always use the this keyword. Is that clear? Whenever you want to access something, like whenever you are inside the object and you want to access something from the object, use this keyword, not the name. You use name whenever you are trying to access it outside the object. Is that clear? Difference is if I want to access weapons outside, I'll just go on and write console.log Avenger.weapons. But if I want to access it inside the object only, I'll use this. This basically specifies the current object. Is that clear? Is the concept of this clear? Understood what is this? Please give me some yeses. Have you understood what is this? Yes, you can use this dot address dot planet exactly, villain, to access the planet. Is it clear? Yes, what is your doubt, Shivangi? Can you tell me? Remember, when you want to access anything outside the object, you always use the object name. But let's say you're doing something inside this bracket only, inside the object. You're trying to do something inside the object. So I'm trying to create a function inside the object, and I want to access the weapon that is also inside the same object. So if I want to access something that is already inside the object, I have to use this keyword. And this basically means the current object that I'm in. This basically means the current object. This basically means the current object. So I'm accessing weapons from this. That basically means I'm trying to access weapons from the current object. Because you see, print weapon is also inside Avengers object, and weapons is also inside Avenger object. So I want to access. So I'm already in Avengers object. I'm already in Avengers object, and I want to access something from the same object. Then I use this. I'm saying this dot weapons. That basically means inside the current object that I'm in. Is that clear? Yeah, it will be a little confusing because it's like a complicated topic to understand. Yes, you can use parameters. I'll show you how to do it. Don't worry about it. Okay, let's try to understand like this. Let's try to understand once again. Let's say in my print weapon function, I want to access this. I want to access this weapons variable. Remember? Understand this. Let's see it once again. Let's see it once again. Please understand. So I have a print weapon function which is inside the Avengers object. And in the same object, I also have the weapons array. Please understand. So print weapon function and weapons array are inside the same object. Now, my print weapon function wants to use this weapons array. Please hear me. My print weapon function wants to use this weapons array. Now, like if I'm trying to access weapons array outside the object, somewhere outside the object, so what I can do is I can write the name of the object, that is Avenger, and I can just access weapons, right? But if I want to access the same weapons array inside the same object, right? Weapons is inside this Avenger object, and print weapon is also inside the same object. Then remember, whenever you want to access in like something inside the object, you always use like this keyword, like this. This means the current object I am in. That's all. This means the current object. So print weapon is inside Avenger object, like the current object. So I'm saying I want to access something from the same object that I am in. By print weapon, I'm showing you how to create a function. There's no need to create it. I'm just showing how to create a function inside an object. Something like in class. Is that clear, everyone? So we use this whenever we want to access something that is inside the object. Okay, let's start understanding this. When you have a class like a calculator, I hope you have learned C or C++ at some point of time in your life. So you have like this, right? You have when you like, let's say you're learning object-oriented programming, and you want to, let's say, create a class, right? Create a class like this. I'll just explain it. Wait. Let's say you have learned C++ at some point in time, and you're creating a class like this. So let's say you have a class, and you have a class as. Please try to understand this. You'll understand it now. Calculator, right? You're creating a class like this, and you have few variables like integer, num, right, and num2 and res, right? And let's say you have functions like this. You have functions like add. Let's say I'm learning C++, right? And I just go on and write res equals to num plus num2 and return res. Something like this, right? You have if you have a subtraction function, you have sub, and then again res equals to num minus num2 and return res, right? Now try to understand this. Now try to understand like this. So I have a class named calculator. Please try to understand. I have a class named calculator which has three variables, num, num2 and res. And I'm creating two functions. One is to add and one is to subtract. And I can access any of my variables inside a function that I have in class. So I have num1, so num and num2 inside my class. And I also have two functions, add and subtract, in the same class, and I'm accessing num and num2 in the function from the class. Is it right? Can you understand this? Is it right? Everyone, can you understand this? I have two functions which are using the properties num and num2. Is it right? Is it right, everyone? Perfect. Now, understand this thing is same. I have properties, I have variables, and I also have a function that is doing something, right? That is doing something. That's all. The only difference here is in C++, when you access a variable inside a function, you just write the name. You just write the name. Understand it like this. When you access a variable inside a function, you just write the name. And in JavaScript, when you access the variable name inside JavaScript, you always use this. That's all. That's the difference. And this basically specifies I'm inside the current class. That's all. Everything inside the current class. I'm taking it from the current class only, from this class only. Is that clear? Is that clear? And someone is also asking why I'm using print weapon function. I have weapons array that is present. I'm using the print weapon function to print the weapons. Is that clear, everyone? Just like I'm having num and num2, but to add them, I'm using an add function. In same case, I have weapons, but to print them, I'm using this print weapon function. Is that clear? Is that clear now? Do you understand it now? Listen, it might be a little complicated at some point of time, but you just have to understand it. Don't worry about it. At start, it is a little complicated, but once you understand it, it's totally fine. I'll show you how to concatenate. Don't worry, Kunal. Is that clear? Now, is this clear with this example? That's totally fine. That's amazing that it's clear. Remember, everything has a solution. You don't have to worry about it. It will be a little confusing at start because it's JavaScript, but once you learn it, it's amazing. So just remember this. Any variable I try to access from this object, I have to use this. If I'm accessing it inside the object. If I'm using it outside, I can just use the name. Fine. Now let's try. So print weapon function is basically used to print my weapon. So what I can do is go on and write this dot weapons. So basically means I'm using the weapons from the current class. Weapons dot for each function. I can use an E or ELE, or I just wrote weapon just to make the naming convention right. And I can just do console.log. So now I have a function which basically does what? Which basically print my all the weapons. Which basically print my all the weapons. So that's all. You just remove this. And now, so listen, I just try to understand this. I have an object. You can also assume it as a class. That's totally fine. Which has name, age, weapons, and address, and which also has a function named print weapon. So now I want to call that print weapon function. So just like that, object name dot function. That's all. Done. That's it. No, it's not an arrow function. It's not an arrow function. It's a normal function. You cannot access weapons from address, right? Address is a different object. You cannot access weapons from address object Morish. You cannot access one variable from a different variable, right? Well, I'll also show you how to use arrow functions. Don't worry about it. But is this clear now? Is this understood? Is this clear now? I hope it is clear to everyone. Remember, this is the most important concept, because when you work with data, when you play with data, everything is a JavaScript object. So this is the most important thing that you're learning right now. The most important thing in JavaScript is objects, because DOM manipulation is very easy, but this is the most important thing. You don't iterate over an address. It's an object, right? You don't iterate it. It has different properties. You access them single, like one by one. You can't iterate it. It's an object. It's not an array. Remember this. Maisa, remember it. You cannot iterate over object. Is it clear, everyone? Cool. Perfect. Now I'll also introduce you to the arrow function. If you like, we don't specify weapons after this, what will happen? Nothing will happen. You cannot do this dot for each because this means current object, right? This means current object. That's basically a question that you can try. Just try to don't specify anything, just print it. Let's see what happens. It will do nothing. Because for each is for arrays, and this is not an array, this is the current object, right? This dot weapons is an array. I have a weapons array, right? Okay, let's do a 5 minutes doubt session before moving on to the next topic. So please ask your doubts. I'll just take 5 minutes to explain everything so that it doesn't get complicated for the future topics, because we will also understand the arrow functions right now. How objects first of all, the concept of Adnan, first of all, the concept of object is same everywhere, right? The concept is same, it has properties and methods. In every other language, you don't directly create objects. You create classes and then you create objects, right? You create class, that is basically the prototype, and then you create an object for that class. That object can access each and every property and function. In JavaScript, when I'm like doing this, you create the object and your object already has properties and functions. You just don't go and create objects otherwise. Your objects has properties and functions. That's all. And the concept is totally same. There's no difference. No, it's not. No, it's not. Comma is not mandatory at the end. I just do it because I don't like without a comma. That's all. Print weapon is a function, Salesh. Print weapon is a function. For each is basically looping it. Like what it's doing is for each is basically looping this, iterating this function. So if you can understand it like a for loop. So for each is basically looping this and accessing one by one. So for each function. So weapons dot for each. So for each value of weapon, call this function. That's all. For each value of weapon, call this function. So first for Mjolnir, and what is happening is I'm iterating over it, and in this weapon, I take the elements one by one. So for the first loop, it will take Mjolnir inside this, and I can do anything what I want inside it. For the second thing, it will take Stormbreaker, and for the third, it will take Thunder. Because print weapon is a function, it is just for our eyes. Print weapon is a function, and these are variables that are storing data. Girish. Yes, you can use for loop, not a problem. If you don't like for each, you can use. For each basically just simplifies. It simplifies it, that's all. Yes, print weapon is a function name. Yes, yes. As there is only one object created, we won't need to accessing this keyword. If you are using something inside the object, you have to use this. If you're going out, you don't have to use this. You can use the name of the object. Let's say I also want to print the address, right? I can just go on and write console.log this dot address. That's all. That's all. So I'm using this print weapon, and I'm also printing the weapons and plus the address. And address and weapon both are inside the same object that my function is in. So I can use this. Yes, print weapon is a method. How can I only print only two weapons? That's fine. You can apply a for loop and just make it run 2 times. That's all. You can write it in a normal way, then you don't have to write this keyword. You can just do it like this. That's all. It also works. That's fine. You don't have to use the function keyword there. It still works now. Just go on and see it. It still works perfectly fine. If you don't want to use the function keyword, if you don't want to use that colon syntax, just write the name of the function, brackets, and that's all. It will just create a confusion, like you'll understand then everything else is basically a key value pair and this is not a key value pair. That's why I wrote it like this, so that people don't get confused. So I just showed you. If you want, if you like, you can use that also. Let's move this function keyword and that colon and use it like this. Yes, you can access, right? If you are trying to access, like we did it at the first place, right? If you don't want to access planet inside the object. If you're doing it outside, listen, anything that you want to access outside the object, you have to use the name of the object. So right now, I'm trying to access this planet outside my object. So my objects ends here, right? My objects end here. If you see, my objects end here. And I'm trying to access planet outside my object. So I have to use the name, right? I have to use the name. So Avenger dot address dot planet, right? Like this. No, it's not in a regular function. In a regular function, these keywords always refer to the scope. If the function is inside an object, it refers to an object. If function is outside the object, it is like anywhere placed, then it will refer to the global window object. Remember, Deepak. I'll show you how to do that. I mean to say using function inside loop. Yes, exactly. No, you have to call the function. This is basically an anonymous function. It is made like this. It will get called every time. But when you're creating a normal function, it will not get called automatically. Inside object, if I use Avenger weapon, you can check it. Let's try to use Avenger address. Let's try. You can see for yourself. Let's try to access it. Listen, that's not a problem. You can also use the name. This is something that JavaScript provides, but this is not a good practice. You can also use the object name inside the same object, but that's not a good practice. That's not what programming follows. So try to use this. It will help you. What will happen actually is, I'll show you. So let's say if you access it by this, right? If you access it by this, you access it by name, you can also access by name. But let's say if in some case or sometime in future you go and change the object name, then you have to change the name everywhere that you have accessed it. But instead of name, if you have accessed it using this, not a problem. Just go on and change it. Doesn't matter. It's still this. That's totally fine then. I can't introduce private, public, protected yet because we are not completely into object-oriented programming. We have already created something called as like a concept of class, but it's not yet a class, but it's the concept of class. Well, I'll show you how to do that. Don't worry. Is it clear to everyone? Weapon, different between function and constructor. It's normal, right? A function is basically a method that you specify. A constructor is something that is created by default. It's always there. And a constructor is something that constructs an object. A constructor is something that actually constructs an object. So even if you don't create a method for it, it's already there. And it's like it gets executed whenever you create an object. That's all. A normal function, you have to call it. A constructor, you just create an object and it is called. Is it clear, everyone? Okay, let's move ahead then. Let's end the doubt session for right now and let's move ahead. Now let's do something big, right? Let's do something big. Let's move. I'll just comment out everything here. Now let's create an array of objects. We have created objects, we have created arrays, and we have created objects inside an object. Now let's create array of objects. So basically array that contains a lot of objects. So now I was having only Thor as my Avenger. Now let's say I have 6 Avengers or 7 Avengers. So what can I do? So I can store all my Avengers inside an array. So I can do something like this. Please see now. Let Avengers. Please see. It's very important. Now it's not an object directly. It's Avengers and it's an array. And now inside my array, I can create an object like this. See, I have like multiple literals, right? Let's say I have 3, right? So now what I'm going to do is Avengers is basically an array and I have 1 object, 2 object and 3 objects inside it. It's for simplicity. I have written it for simplicity. So I'm going to have 3 objects inside my Avengers array and all the objects will have some kind of properties. So first one will have name, Thor, and let's say it also has an age, and everyone will have the same thing, right? Age is 1500, right? The second object will also have name, let's say right? And the third object will also have the same thing, name, age, 23, something. See, I also have an Avengers array which has three objects, right? Is it understood? Is it simple? I can also have objects inside an array. Is it simple? So the first object is on zero index. Same. Consider it like I have three elements in my array. Consider it like I have three elements in my array. So the first element, the first object is on zeroth index. The second object is on first index, and the third object is on the second index. So if I try, I can just go on console.log Avengers of 0. Now let's see what's happening. Please try to understand. Let's go on and see. We have this. Is it clear? Is it clear, everyone? Please, Aditya Kundu, don't spam. I want to read the chats and solve questions, please. If you don't like it, you can just don't watch it. That's fine. Please, but don't spam it, please. Is that clear, everyone? Fine. Now, what I've done is, if I do Avengers of 1, so I'll basically get the second object, right? If I just do Avengers of 1, so I get the second object, right? Now, Avengers of 1 gives me this object, and now I want to access the name. So Avengers of 1 is basically giving me the complete object. So what I can do is I can just apply a dot, and same, I can access the name. So Avengers of 1 is giving me this object, right? And I just dot name, and I get the name. Is it simple? So that's all. It's totally simple. Is it clear? Is it clear, everyone? You can do something like this. I'm just saying you can also have objects inside an array. Yes, we'll do it. Like it is array, right? We can apply loops. That's totally fine. Let's try to do it. Let's try to print all the objects using a loop. And right now I'm not using a for each loop. I'll use a for loop so that you understand it better. So let's try to use a for loop. So I'll just go for let I equals 0. I is less than. Now you see I have three objects. So basically I have indexes like 0, 1, and 2. Right? So I can just go on and write less than equal to 2 and I plus plus. And console.log, please understand this is very important. Console.log, treat it like a normal array, Avengers of I. So if I try to understand this, if you try to understand it, my I is going from 0 to 2. It basically means it will go from 0 and 1, then 2, right? So once it will access Avengers of 0, it basically is the whole first object. Then Avengers of 1, that basically is the whole second object. And then Avengers of 2, basically is the whole third object. So I'm printing all my three objects together by using this loop. Simple. Save it, refresh, and you can see I have all my objects ready. Yes, you can do that. Yes, Deepak, perfect. That you can use it. Right? Let's say I want to print name of all three, just like Deepak has wrote here. I want to print name of all these three. So you know, at one point of time, this Avengers of I is giving me the whole object, right? It's giving me the whole object. So if I get the object, if I have an object, I can just access the property of it, right? By using dot. So I can just write dot name. So now this loop will run for 3 times, for 0, 1, and 2. And then for the first object, I'm printing the name. Then again for the second object, I'm printing the name. And then for the third object, I'm also printing the name. Yes, I'll also show you by for each, don't worry. So I'm accessing all the three names. Can you see? For each is used only when, no, it's not like that, Abdullah. It's not like that. You can use for each anywhere, not a problem. But you have to specify a function inside for each. That is by default. That is the syntax. That is the syntax. Now, if I like, I don't have to specify 2 here. I can just go till less than the length of my, right? So like we have learned it in the previous videos, right? specifying, you can just go to level.play, and that's totally fine. Save. That's all. Now, if I want to like do it using for loop, for each loop, that's totally fine. It's really safe. Just go on the array name dot for each. You always have a function inside it. I can just name anything, ELE, I, M. Basically, it is a variable that will store the current object just for once. So I'll use Avenger because it just gives me a good naming convention. Because it is going to store a single Avenger object for once. I can just do the same thing. So I have one by using for loop, I have one by using for each loop, and both are same. No, you can use anything, I'll show you. But we are still trying to understand objects, right? I'll show you, Bose, Monali, I'll show you how to put all this on a web page. Don't worry about it. We have lectures there. Don't worry about it. See, I'm doing the same thing. Okay, I have this printed object. If I want, like, I can just go on print name again. So I've done the same thing twice, once by for loop and once by for each loop. Is that clear, everyone? Is it understood? Is it understood, everyone? I hope everyone is also enjoying learning the lectures. Chetan, why we pass the parameter? We pass parameter because if we want to give some kind of dynamic value to the function whenever we are calling it. So just to give dynamic values to the functions, we pass parameters. No, you cannot use for each without function. It's the syntax. Sandeep, it's the syntax. It's how it works. Okay. Now let's move on. So now I hope everyone has understood objects. Now we are cleared with variables. If I like talk from the first session, let's start from the first session only. Now we understood variables properly. Now we understood functions properly. And now we understood objects properly. And now we are done with the basic concepts of JavaScript, that is the programming concepts. And now we will move on to DOM manipulation. And we'll try to mix all these and learn, like, see what we can do, what we can achieve, and what we can create. So let's start with the first, like we have half an hour left. So let's start with the basic sort of DOM. I forgot that. Thank you. Thank you for letting me know. I'll show you how arrow function works. So I'll go to the second file again in the functions thing. And I'll change the link just to show you how arrow function works. Again, functions.js. Now remember, there is no difference in working of normal functions and arrow functions. Remember this. There's like a lot of people have a myth like arrow functions does something really fast or something really cool. It's not like that. A function is a function. A function is a block of code. There is one difference, and I'll tell you what it does. But in working scenario, in working case, both are same. A function will always be a function. Whether it is syntactically different or the creation of it is different, a function will always be a function. It's not like that a function will work something better for you, right? So I'll show you how to create an arrow function, right? So I'll show you by creating two examples. The same thing, once by normal thing and once by arrow function. Once by normal declaration or once by arrow function. I'll just come here. I'll just try it. I'll show you everything that arrow function has. Yes, it's just the evolution of syntax. That's a perfect way to put it. It's just the evolution of syntax. Right? That kind of function creation was already present in Java and C#. If you have ever heard of lambda expressions in Java and C#, that's basically a close relative to arrow functions in JavaScript. That's basically one way of creating functions. If you have ever heard of lambda expression in Java and C#, they are same as arrow functions. So I'll just write normal function. So what we can do is we can just go on and create a function like function, let's say do something, right? And just do it like console.log help. It's totally fine. Help. So now if I just go on and refresh, okay, I think I've done something, some problem in saving or linking. Functions.js, right? Oh, I haven't called that function. Perfect. So I'll just go on and write do something. Something and something. Save it, refresh it, and you see a normal help. Now let's try to do the same. Don't worry if you don't know about Lambda, that's totally fine. That's totally fine. Now let's try to do the same thing with an arrow function. So what you have to do is you just name it like do something equals. Then you have brackets, the parenthesis, and then the implied symbol, the pointer, and then the same bracket. And just do on console.log help. Remember, the process of calling is same. So if I just comment this out, just save it and run it now. You see, you always get help. You also get hello here. Is it clear now? So this is how you do it. You have a function. This is a normal way of doing it, and this is an arrow function way of doing it. That's all. Now, there's one thing that you can achieve here is arrow function says if we have a single line of code, you don't have to specify curly braces. If you have a single line of code, you don't have to specify curly braces. That's all. You can just do this, and it's totally fine. I'll just comment it out and see. See? Still printing help. Yes, I'll show you how to pass arguments. Don't worry. It's just a bagel. Don't worry about it. Is it clear? So if you have only a single line, you don't have to like specify braces. You can just go on and write the thing. But you have multiple lines, you have to put some braces. Now, let's see how to pass parameters inside our function. So let's pass parameters first in the normal function, right? So let's go and create, let's say I have a parameter called name. Okay? I have a parameter called name. So instead of writing this hello, I'll just write hello and then right, I have a normal function. So I now have to like put something in this, an argument. So I'll just put an argument named Saurabh. Now this function will print hello Saurabh, as I know. So let's just go put, and that's perfectly fine. It's printing. Now let's try to do the same thing with arrow function. I'll just comment it out and comment again your parameter and just the same thing that do you here that you did in the normal function. That's all. Same thing, completely same thing. See, it is doing the same thing. Now, what arrow function says, like if you know that you only have a single parameter, like if you only one, you don't need to specify parentheses also. You can just do this. Like my editor is by default doing it. If I'm saving it, it is making the code good for me. But I'm saying that if and only if you have a single parameter, you don't have to specify this parenthesis. But it's always a good practice. That's why if I'm saving it, my editor is all like doing it already. Because it is good. This just to remember, like just to let you know that you don't have to specify parentheses if you only have single parameters. And if you don't have to, like you don't have to specify curly braces if you have only a single line of code. That's all. That's how arrow functions are made. No C and C++ don't have arrow functions. Arrow functions are only present in JavaScript, and in Java and C# they are known as lambda expressions. Is it clear? Yes, Sachal will learn all that. This is not just the time to learn promises, callbacks, and async await. Don't move too fast. There's nothing that you achieve. It's just like your syntax is much more clear and shorter. That's all. Don't worry if you don't have any idea about lambda expression. We are not teaching it. I just said here it is not known as lambda expression. It is just arrow functions. I just related to it. Manisha, it's not known here in JavaScript. It is always known as arrow functions. That's all. Is that clear, everyone? Martin, do you have any doubt? What is wrong? Can you please tell me? Okay, great. Now let's try to understand the difference. Now just let's try to understand the difference. Like, what is the difference between arrow function and normal function? And for that, let's write arrow function here so that it's always get arrow function. Okay. Now to understand the difference, we again get back to the topic of objects to understand the difference. Let's try. Again, we need to understand the difference between arrow function and normal function. There's only one difference, working wise. Otherwise, everything is same, just syntactically difference. What is the doubt, Tanya? Are you confused in some place? Okay, I'll explain that again, don't worry. Let me link it properly. It's simple. It's totally simple. This is a normal function, and this is an arrow function, doing the same things. In normal function, you have to specify the function keyword, and then name, and then parameter. In arrow functions, you can just specify a name like a variable, and equals to, and then parenthesis. And whatever parameters you have, just put it here, and then a pointer, and then your code. If it is single line, you can write it directly, and if it is multiple lines, you specify curly braces. That's all. If it is multiple lines, you specify curly braces. That's all. That's different. I'll show you how to do that with arrow function. Don't worry. Array or arrow function. Arrow function is different. Array is different. Don't get confused. Array is something different. I'll show you how to work with both. You don't have to understand lambda. Lambda is not here, Manisha. Lambda, I just related to it. Like, the same concept of arrow functions is also done in C# and Java, and there it is known as lambda expressions, and here it is known as arrow functions. You don't have to compare both. Don't worry. Yes, wherever you can use normal functions, you can also use arrow functions. Not a problem. It's totally same. As I said, they do nothing. Functions are always same. Is that clear? Functions are functions. That's all. Functions are functions. They are just a block of code. Arrow function is just syntactically different and easy. That's all. Okay, fine. Now let's move on. Let's close this. Now let's try this. Let's try the above example that we created by using. Okay, I'll create one more object actually to make you understand it. Listen, what I'm doing is I'm explaining you the difference between a normal function and arrow function. What is the one and only difference? Yes, fat arrow and arrow function are same. Yes, Ashish. Yes. Fat arrow is basically the name of the symbol that we use. The name of the pointer symbol, that is known as a fat arrow. Let's comment it. Now let's try to create an object again. Please try to understand the difference now. There's only one difference. So let's say I have an object named demo. Demo. And it's an object. And it has a variable name. It is laptop. And it has a function now. It has a function. So I'm creating a normal function. So let's write print name. Print name is my function, right? Print name is my function. I'm just printing this keyword inside it, right? And let's try to access this function. So demo, I'm calling that function dot print name, right? Simple. Is this simple? Is this simple to understand? We've already learned it, right? Is this simple? An object which has a property name and a function print name, which is basically printing. Or if you get confused, you can write it like this. The thing that we used. Is it simple, right? Now, as we know, I have printed this. Now this is basically the context of current object. That basically means the current object. So let's see what it is doing. Let's see what it is printing. Okay, perfect. It is printing the current object. Perfect. It is printing the current object. But now, if if let's say print name is not a normal function, if it was an arrow function, what will it do? Let's say now it is an arrow function, right? Now let's try to print it. Did I do something wrong? Oh, sorry. It's not equal to here, it's a colon here. In fact, an object you don't use equal to, you use a colon for assignment. It's a key value there, right? Now can you see? So arrow functions don't like get the current object as the value of this. For arrow functions, this is always global. The main object, the window object. I'll let you know what a window object is, but just understand. In normal functions, if you try to access this, it will give you the context of the current object that the function is in. For example, if it is a normal function, it was giving me the current object, right? But if it is an arrow function, this will not give me the current object. It will give me the global window object. Is that clear? That's the only difference. Difference wise, this is the only difference. Is that clear? Normal function in normal function is basically the current object, and this in an arrow function is basically the global object. That's all. It doesn't give you the current object. Is that clear, everyone? You don't have to worry about this. It's just a difference. That's all. It will not harm you. It will not do anything for you. You just have to make it like this. That's all. Is this clear? This is the only difference. Everything else is just syntactically different. Does the same thing no matter what. I'll explain you what is a global window object. Don't worry. Everyone who is asking what is a global object, I'll explain. Now is the time to understand all that because we are going to learn DOM manipulation. Is that clear, everyone? And don't worry, I'll explain you promises, async await, and everything in coming sessions because this is not the right time yet to understand because we have a lot of things to cover. Window is the global object. Okay, fine. I hope everyone is clear now. Now I'll just comment this out. I'll just create a new file so that we have a new file for everything. So this is what we were waiting for. I'll just write domman.js. That basically means DOM manipulation.js. That's all. And now I'll change the link of objects. Like DOM man. That's okay. Now let's try to understand few things first. I'll explain you constructor Chaitanya when we are dealing with classes. Don't worry about it. Fine. Now let's try to understand how does DOM manipulation work. So remember this thing now. In JavaScript, we are done with programming concepts, right? We are done with programming concepts. So in JavaScript, to work with DOM, browser by default gives you a lot of objects. Browser by default gives you a lot of objects to work with DOM. So to work with DOM, you take the help of that already given or already present or inbuilt objects. So when I was saying window is nothing but an inbuilt object. That's all. Window is nothing but an inbuilt object that helps you to manipulate the DOM. I have already explained what is DOM in the previous lectures, but I'll explain you today once, like in a very short manner. That's totally it. So window is basically an object provided by default in JavaScript, just like you have, you can see, just let's try to understand, like you have inbuilt functions in C, right? Print, then you have in Java system object, right? In the same case, window is basically an object provided by JavaScript, and window is parent of everything. Every object that you use here is basically a child of window. That's all. Every object that you use here is basically a child of window. Even console is a child of window. So we have a lot of objects. So think window is the parent, is the highest on the hierarchy. So window has few childs, like console is one child of window, Document is other child of window. Screen is one other child of window. So the list goes on. So window is basically the parent. So some Manisha you have written console.window. You don't have to write console.window. It's actually window.console because window is the parent, not console. So window is the parent of all the objects. Is that clear? And it has console inside it, document inside it, and screen inside it. So window is basically an object. Now, when I say if I say window is an object, that basically means it has a lot of properties and methods. Yes, you can say it as a superclass. Yes, it's a superclass for everything. Every object that is present in JavaScript is basically a child of window object. Is that clear? Is that clear, everyone? So, if I write console.log, let's try to understand this. Hello. So console is also an inbuilt object. Console is also an inbuilt object. If I just print it, you can see it's hello. But even console comes from window. So it's actually window.console.log. And if you do this, it will get the same output. Is that clear? Now you'll ask why it is like this, like you can use it or you don't use it. Now in JavaScript, as I said, everything comes from window. So if you even don't specify window, browser by default applies it everywhere. It is like window is going to be used everywhere. That's why it's really common. And for that case, you don't have to use it. So even if you use it, it doesn't matter. If you don't use it, browser will apply. If you use it, that's totally fine. Because window is the parent of everything. Browser knows it, editor knows it. Is it fine, everyone? As I said, if I just write console.log, Shivangi, if I just write console.log, browser will by default apply window to it. Yes, exactly, William. Like object class in Java. Object is the parent of everything. In same case, window is the parent of everything. Is that clear, everyone? So the objects that I mentioned, we are going to learn and do manipulation. The document object, the screen object, and console, we are like already working with that. Is that clear? So today we are only going to learn few methods of window. Like, yes, history is also an object. Exactly, Achal. History is also an object. Let's see if we can cover it in all these sessions because we have a lot of important things to cover. So now, for today only, like we don't have a lot of time left. So for today, we'll see two methods two functions that are provided by window object that we haven't used yet. So let's try to understand and let's see what they do. Actually, three methods, not two, three methods. So let's start. So window, like we know console is basically an object inside window, but we have already worked with that. So let's see what are the methods that are provided by window object. So there is something called as window.alert. You'll see here, you might have seen this thing a lot of times. Let's see what it does. This is a function. Let's see what it does. Save it and see, refresh. See this? See this? You might have seen a lot of times. So whenever you want to give like a notification or an error message or an alert in the browser or a pop-up message, you can just go with window.alert. So alert is a function which creates this pop-up for you. Is that clear, everyone? And as I said, window is not necessary. It is by default applied. So even if you don't apply it, it totally works. Just understand it. Behind the scene, window is already present. Is it clear? Clear with alert, everyone? Now, the second method that window has is basically prompt. And prompt is again almost same. It's a pop-up, but it is used to take input from the user. So this is the first step where you're going to take input from the user. You can just print it anything like enter name. It by default creates a field for you. See, this is my message, and by default creates a field for you. So if you just write anything and okay, that's totally fine. But right now, if you just see, I have done nothing with prompt. Prompt is just, it will just prompt a text box, you print a value, okay, and it does nothing. So actually, prompt function returns something. Prompt function returns the value that you put inside the text box. So what you can do is, you can store it in a variable. You just write like name equals to this. So prompt function will create that box for you. Whatever you put in it, if you enter, if you press OK, this prompt function returns that value. And whatever this is returning, I'm storing it in name. And what I can do is, I can just console.log that name. That's totally fine. Is that simple to understand? Let's try. Refresh. Okay, let's put some name. I put Saurabh. Okay. Can you see on the console? Is that clear, everyone? Is that clear, everyone? Is prompt cleared? Okay. Now let's see one more that we have here. So alert is just to show messages. Prompt is to take user values from. Can we use value of prompt function output? Yes. Why not? Okay. Now there's a third thing that we can use, something called as confirm box. It is basically to get either true or false from user. So you can give them a notification like, do you really want, like you have seen sometimes, like, are you really want to, like, do you want to stay on this page, or are you really want to like leave the page? 1 second, I think, okay, fine. You can do that. So let's say, do you want to go to Google? Right? Save it. Okay. We want to go to Google. So you have two options, OK or cancel. If you press OK, you get a true value. And if you press a cancel, you get a false value. So right now, if I do, I get nothing because I have never stored it. So what I can do is I can just go on and I can just write let answer. Right? Now let's try. Let's print the answer and see what comes inside the answer if I press. Okay, let's see. Now let's refresh. You want to go to Google? Okay. See, you get true. If I just say F5 again, refresh, you want to go to Google, cancel. False. And I can use that true or false to do anything. So let's try to go to Google. Let's try to go to Google. Right? So if answer is equal to false, let's just try console.log. Okay. Here. Else, if it comes true, then what to do? So, well, and this is not the only way to do it, but this is one of the ways to do it. Yes. Now, what I want to do is I want to go to Google. So I have a property in window object that I can use to change my URL. To change my URL and go somewhere else. So I can just go on write window dot location. And then I can change. So window dot location basically refers to the URL in the URL bar. Window dot location basically refers to the URL that is present in URL bar. So I can change it. I can change this URL dynamically. So I can just go on write https://www.google.co.in. That's all. Now let's try. Refresh. Okay, cancel. Okay, stay here. Refresh again. Yes, I want to go. Okay. And see now. I'm here. See this? Are we cleared with confirm? Do you understand this alert, prompt, and confirm, everyone? Are we cleared with this? That's amazing. That's amazing. Fine. Okay, let's start. Let's do a five. We cannot do anything else in the left 3 or 4 minutes. We'll continue it tomorrow, the actual DOM manipulation. So now, if you have any doubts, you can ask me in the next 5 minutes, please. Any kind of doubts. Okay, that's amazing. Yes, indeed. Happy teachers to you as well. What script group is in Java or Python? It uses both, man. It uses Python. Like when you create a website like Google, it's really big, using a lot of things in the back. So you use a lot of things. You might use Java to call some functions, some basic functions. You might use Python to run some scripts that you want to run fast and like in a secure way. So it uses a lot of things, mixture of everything. I'll give you assignment. Don't worry. I'll give you a lot of assignments. I'll give you assignment to Harshrat sir, and you can find it on the community there. I also gave the assignment last time. Hope you find it. I'll also give assignment today, and also share all these files to Harshrat sir. He will share it on the community. How to create instance of the same object. It's actually by default object. You don't have to create any instance mesa. It's already an object. If you have to create an object separately, if you create a class, we actually created directly the object by using little mesa. So we'll also see how to create a proper class on object formation. Yes, I will give the assignment to Harshraj sir, and he will post it on the community, and you can see there. Yes, Maria, alert, prompt, and confirm are the functions of window object. Can I use JSON for creating a software? If not, what more language line? Yes, you can use JS for creating a software. Like nowadays, JS is doing everything. So you can also create Android and iOS applications using JS. Not a problem. You can use JS anywhere. Do we need to write window.location? You can directly write location, not a problem. Yes, that's a good thinking you had. You can just write location. That's totally fine. That's totally fine. Document.querySelector is used to basically fetch any HTML element in JavaScript to work with it. We'll see it tomorrow. Don't worry about it, Deepak. We'll see it tomorrow. D3.js is a library, Sandeep. It's just a library. There are a lot of libraries. jQuery is also a library. So there are a lot of libraries that JS has to do some different functionalities, but they are just JS codes, nothing else. Yes, Maria, you're right. It's basically a variable of window object. Window is the parent of all the objects, Chetan. You're passing, right? If you have written hello in alert, that basically is you're passing a string parameter, right? Well, I have written hello in alert. That basically is a parameter. That basically is argument. That basically means wherever alert is created, there is a string parameter that it takes. That's why I'm passing argument, right? Yes, Deepak. So there are a lot of ways by which you can select elements. So there is query selector, there is by class name, by ID, by name, by tag name. So there are a lot of ways to fetch elements. We'll see everything. Can we get an array input? Nobody know. You cannot get an array input because it just gives you a normal string. So if you want, you can take a string and convert it in an array, but you can't get an array input in a prompt. It just takes in string input. Well, if you want, you can just get a comma separated and then you can comma separated value, and then you can just convert it into array. So now session is finished. Can we leave? Yes, yes, yes. Session is finished. I'm just asking if you have any doubts. You can ask me right now. Session is finished. We can meet tomorrow at 12. We are going to work with DOM manipulation. So tomorrow's class will be a lot of fun. Don't miss it. No, we are not learning only basics, right? Tomorrow we'll be working with DOM manipulation. Today we are completed with the programming concepts. Tomorrow and in the next session, the 2 sessions, we are going to work with DOM manipulation, and we are going to create few assignments. And after that, I'm going to also explain how to work with set intervals, timeouts, and how our promises and asynchronous JS, how it works and everything. And I'll also show you how to fetch data from APIs. So that's a lot of JS. You cannot complete everything because there are a lot of things that you people have to do on your own. But I'll just give you all the kickstart that you need to work with JS. Yes, you can actually, you can have it, but you have to research for it. You have to do a little research. You can do that. On click, you can call a lot of things. Yes, JS supports functional programming, right? If you create functions and call them, that basically is functional programming. No, we are not covering database connections. That is basically Node.js. That is different, Vishal. That is different. It's just JS, not Node.js. Yes, you can create multiple prompts, Ashish. You can create multiple prompts and that will basically go one after the other. Thank you, Deepak. Thank you. Thank you so much. Yeah, don't worry, Manikandan. I'll try my best to explain to people. Don't worry. We have a lot of fun things to come. So this is basically we have completed programming concepts. We have a lot of fun things to come. Very interesting, and we create a lot of things. Like we are going to create two or two things, but the best ones. Okay, so I don't see any doubts coming. Deepak, I'll explain you. Don't worry about this document.url. It's almost the same thing. Yes, we are going to work with DOM from tomorrow, Manisha. Yes. If you don't understand DOM, don't worry about it. You can just go and visit my first session, the day one. I have explained what is DOM. So if you have any doubts in for each or DOM, you can just go back, watch the previous two videos and understand everything. It's always up on YouTube. Yes, 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 Tausif, yes. You need to know a little. So if people from tomorrow we are going to work with DOM. So if you don't know HTML and CSS, please try to learn it. It's very simple. Just try to understand few basic things. A lot of things I'll explain. Don't worry. There are a lot of HTML and CSS things that I'll explain how to work with. But just please try to understand. If you don't know HTML and CSS at all, just try to understand few things so that you can understand a lot of things tomorrow. Otherwise, it will be very tough for you to understand. Okay, then I don't see any doubts coming. Thank you so much for joining, guys. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for joining. Yes, everything is available on YouTube, Shani. Everything is available. Just go on and search for this playlist, JavaScript Essentials Batch 2. You get everything. Just search for Let's Upgrade JavaScript Essentials Batch 2. You get the previous two batches. How much of HTML? Just basics, right? Just learn some basic tags and some basic CSS properties. That's all. That's all you have to learn, Sandeep. You'll just take 1 or 2 hours to learn basic HTML and CSS. Okay, guys, I don't see any doubts coming. So yes, we are learning ES6, Manish. We are learning ES6 only. I'll post the assignment on the community. You can just go and find it there in next 1 or 2 hours. And thank you so much for joining, everyone. I'll see you today. And happy Teachers Day to you all.
Thank you, sir. So we'll
Thank you
end
so
the
much.
stream.